Have you ever met someone who's alive, but not really living? Their eyes are open, their heart is beating, but there's no spark, no emotion, no real presence. It's as if a part of them died long ago, and they never came back. The truth is, this isn't rare. It's more common than you think, and psychology has something to say about it. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about something deeply uncomfortable, yet incredibly real. Why most people today are emotionally dead inside. Not because they chose to be, but because something slowly, silently was taken from them. Their emotions, their spark, their connection to life. And at the heart of it all lies a powerful psychological phenomenon known as emotional numbness, often paired with what psychologists call learned helplessness. It begins subtly. A child expresses joy, creativity, sadness, anger, but over time, the responses they receive shape what emotions are acceptable. Crying is labeled as weakness. Showing excitement is seen as immature. Expressing fear, that's a sign of failure. So they learn to suppress, to mute, to hide, and each time they do, they lose a small part of themselves. Slowly, they begin to feel less, not because they want to, but because it feels safer. Now, fast forward that child into adulthood. They wake up one day, not necessarily sad or depressed, but empty. Nothing excites them. Nothing hurts them either. They're just, okay, going through the motions, functioning, but not truly living. And this is where the dark side of psychology shows its face. Emotional numbness isn't just a lack of feeling. It's a coping mechanism, a defense built by the brain to survive chronic stress, trauma, or repeated emotional shutdown. But there's another layer, a more dangerous one. It's called learned helplessness, a term coined by psychologist Martin Seligman in the 1960s. It refers to a state in which a person, after facing repeated negative experiences where they had no control, eventually stops trying, even when opportunities to escape or change do exist. Think of it like this. If life keeps telling you you can't win, eventually your brain believes it. And so you stop fighting, stop hoping, stop feeling. What's the point, right? This combination, emotional numbness and learned helplessness, creates the perfect storm. The person becomes emotionally paralyzed, not because they're lazy, not because they're weak, but because their brain has been trained to protect them from pain, even if that means shutting down joy, love, ambition, and curiosity as well. And here's the tragedy. Society often praises these emotionally numb individuals. We call them strong, stable, mature. We celebrate people who don't cry, who don't complain, who keep their head down and keep moving. But what we're really looking at are people in survival mode. People who have built thick walls not around their homes, but around their hearts. And do you know what's worse? Many of them don't even realize it. They think this is normal, that it's just adulthood, that being emotionally flat is just part of growing up. But psychology disagrees. Emotional numbness is not a sign of wisdom. It's a symptom of emotional injury. Now, let's get a little scientific. The brain has this tiny structure called the amygdala. It processes emotions, especially fear and threat. When you experience trauma or prolonged stress, your amygdala becomes hyperactive. Your body is constantly in fight or flight mode to protect itself from burnout. Your brain starts cutting off unnecessary emotional responses. This is where numbness begins. Then comes the prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and emotional regulation. Over time, even that becomes impaired. So you stop reacting, not just to bad things, but even to good things. You don't get excited about a promotion. You don't feel anything when a loved one hugs you. You're not sad, but you're not happy either. You're blank. This is what it means to be dead inside. And it's not your fault. It's the result of a world that doesn't know how to deal with real emotions. A world that forces people to toughen up instead of open up. A world where vulnerability is mocked and survival is glorified. But here's the hope. What is learned can be unlearned. Emotional numbness is not permanent. With awareness, therapy, connection, and self-compassion, people can slowly start feeling again. Slowly start living again. It begins with noticing the silence inside you and choosing not to ignore it. So if you ever felt emotionally empty, disconnected, or dead inside, know this. You're not broken. You're human. And what's been suppressed can be restored. But it takes courage. The courage to face what hurt you, to unlearn what numbed you, and to reclaim the emotions that once made life feel meaningful. Because to truly live is not just to breathe, it is to feel. And psychology at its core is not about labeling you. It's about freeing you. Have you ever wondered why so many people feel lost in their own lives, even when they seem to be doing everything right? They have the job, the car, the house. They smile in photos, post achievements, and say the right things. But deep inside, they feel fake, disconnected, like they're living someone else's life. That's not just a feeling. It's the result of a psychological process called societal conditioning, and it's far more dangerous than it sounds. From the moment we're born, we're shaped not just by our families, but by culture, media, religion, education, and expectations. We're told what success looks like, how a good person behaves, what emotions are acceptable, and which dreams are too unrealistic. And so we begin adapting. But adaptation, when repeated over years, slowly turns into self-erasure. We become versions of ourselves that are easier for others to accept, but harder for us to recognize. Psychology calls this the creation of a false self, a persona designed to meet external demands while hiding the inner truth. It's the reason someone can laugh at a party while feeling deeply alone, or excel in their career while secretly battling depression, or be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. The false self is a survival strategy. When children grow up in environments where their true thoughts or feelings aren't welcomed, whether because of strict parenting, fear of judgment, or cultural suppression, they learn to suppress. They learn to read the room, mirror others, and conform. The child who once said, "I'm scared," now says, "I'm fine." The teen who wanted to be an artist becomes an engineer. The adult who wants to rest pretends to love the grind. Over time, the mask becomes the face, and they forget who they were before the world told them who to be. But here's where it gets dark. Living as the false self requires constant emotional labor. Every smile, every yes when you meant no, every effort to appear happy when you're falling apart. It costs energy, and eventually, that energy runs out. What follows is emotional exhaustion, identity confusion, and in many cases, deep internal numbness. Not because they don't care, but because caring became too dangerous. Now let's go deeper. Imagine a society that rewards a false self. A culture that celebrates people who hustle nonstop, who never show vulnerability, who always look perfect. It's not just individuals who create masks, it's the world around them that demands it. This is why many people feel like they're living on autopilot. They become performers in their own lives, acting out a script written by someone else. It looks like success, but it feels like emptiness. Psychologically, this creates what's known as incongruence, a term Carl Rogers, the famous humanistic psychologist, described as the gap between who we truly are and who we pretend to be. The greater the gap, the greater the emotional pain. Because deep down, the real self doesn't disappear. It just hides. It waits for a safe space to emerge again. And until that space is created, people feel fragmented, unfulfilled, and yes, dead inside. Let's take a common example. A man grows up being told, real men don't cry. So he builds a personality around toughness. No emotions, no vulnerability. On the outside, he's strong, but inside, he's emotionally starved. He doesn't know how to process loss, grief, or even love. He's not heartless. He's emotionally conditioned. He's become the mask, and so have millions of others. The same happens with women told to always be nice, or with children raised in families where obedience is more important than honesty. Over time, people stop asking, "What do I want?" Instead, they ask, "What will they approve of?" And that question becomes their compass, leading them further and further away from themselves. This is why many midlife crises, sudden breakdowns, or quiet depressions aren't caused by failure, but by success. Because after chasing the ideal life for years, some people finally get it and realize they still feel empty. The job didn't fix it. The relationship didn't fill the void. The house didn't heal the ache. Why? Because the life they built was the false self, not the real one. And the real self, unloved, unheard, has been silently dying for years. But there's hope. Psychology doesn't just reveal the problem. It offers a path back. The journey from the false self to the real self begins with awareness, with noticing when you're acting for approval instead of authenticity, with asking yourself not, what should I do, but what do I feel? What do I need? Who am I beneath the roles? It's not easy. Shedding years of conditioning feels like removing armor you've worn your whole life. But that armor, while once protective, has become a cage, and healing begins the moment you dare to take it off. Ladies and gentlemen, we were not born to be hollow copies of others. We were born with depth, emotion, individuality, and spirit. The dark side of psychology shows us how society can bury the self, but the light side reminds us it can be found again. There's something deeply misunderstood about pain. Not the kind that comes from a physical wound, but the kind that lives quietly beneath the surface. The kind that doesn't scream. It whispers, unprocessed, unseen, forgotten by the conscious mind, but remembered by the body. This is a reality for millions of people who walk through life, carrying emotional trauma they've never faced. And this, more than almost anything else, is what slowly kills them from the inside out. When a person experiences trauma, whether it's abuse, neglect, humiliation, betrayal, or even prolonged emotional neglect, the brain goes into survival mode. It protects itself by pushing the memory down into the subconscious. It's a defense mechanism. The pain doesn't go away, it just hides. And from that moment on, the person begins living two lives, the one they show the world and the one their subconscious never forgets. This is where the real damage begins. Psychology tells us that unprocessed trauma doesn't just fade with time, it festers. It seeps into how we see ourselves, how we treat others, and how we experience the world. A child who was made to feel unworthy of love may grow into an adult who sabotages every relationship they enter. A teen who was never allowed to express anger may become someone who fears confrontation their whole life. A person who was once betrayed may never trust again, even when they want to. And yet, they often can't explain why. They just feel off, anxious without reason, depressed without cause, easily triggered by small things, constantly overthinking, or worse, completely numb. This numbness isn't laziness or indifference. It's a sign that the emotional system is shutting down to avoid reliving the original pain. The subconscious mind is powerful. It stores every memory, every moment, every wound. Even when we can't consciously recall something, our behavior remembers. Our reactions remember. Our fears remember. That's why someone might flinch when touched gently, or feel unsafe in silence, or chase emotionally unavailable people again and again, because their subconscious has equated dysfunction with normalcy. Now, imagine this happening to millions of people at once. A society full of individuals walking around with suppressed pain, smiling for photos, laughing at jokes, attending meetings, while inside, their nervous system is frozen, their emotions disconnected, their ability to feel joy, love, safety muted. It's not just tragic, it's dangerous. Unprocessed trauma affects brain chemistry. The amygdala becomes hypersensitive, constantly scanning for threats, even when none exist. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational thought, struggles to regulate emotions. The hippocampus, which helps process memory, begins to shrink. Over time, this rewiring leads to a person being stuck in a loop of hypervigilance, avoidance, and emotional deadness. This is a hidden reason many people can't enjoy their lives, even when things are going well. They're not ungrateful. They're not spoiled. They're haunted by memories that never healed, haunted by emotions they never learned how to process, haunted by a subconscious that is still living in the past, while the body tries to survive the present. And here's the irony. Our culture doesn't teach emotional healing. It teaches emotional suppression. We're taught to move on, to be strong, to stop dwelling on things. But pain that isn't felt doesn't disappear. It gets buried. And buried pain always resurfaces in the form of addiction, overachievement, isolation, perfectionism, emotional unavailability, It resurfaces in our choices, our relationships, and even our health. There are people who haven't cried in years, not because they haven't felt pain, but because they've forgotten how to feel it all. People who can't connect deeply with anyone, not because they don't want to, but because intimacy feels dangerous. These are the invisible scars left by trauma, and they're everywhere. But there is hope. Healing begins when we stop running from what hurt us, when we stop numbing and start noticing, when we stop distracting ourselves with constant noise and start listening to what our inner world is trying to say. Therapy, journaling, somatic work, inner child healing. These aren't just trendy terms. They are lifelines to those who are emotionally drowning and don't even realize it. The truth is, most people who feel dead inside aren't broken. They're wounded, and those wounds can heal if they're allowed to surface. But healing isn't comfortable. It requires facing the memories we buried, feeling the emotions we avoided, rewriting the beliefs we inherited. That process is painful, but it's the pain that leads to freedom. We cannot change the past, but we can change the grip it has on our present. The subconscious isn't our enemy. It's a messenger. Every emotional trigger is a clue. Every breakdown is a doorway. Every feeling we fear is a guide leading us back to wholeness. Being dead inside is not a life sentence. It's a signal, a call to return to the parts of ourselves we left behind, the parts that felt too much, cared too deeply, hoped too honestly. Those parts are still there, waiting. And when we begin to listen, feel, and understand, not just with the mind, but with the heart, we come back to life. There comes a point when people stop asking themselves how they feel and start asking what they're supposed to feel. Not because they've lost interest in emotions, but because they've lost the ability to trust them. This final and most dangerous layer of psychological death is the disconnection from one's true self. The quiet internal collapse that happens when a person spends so long being what the world wants. They forget who they really are. This isn't a dramatic fall. It's subtle. It happens over years. 1,000 compromises. 1,000 swallowed emotions. 1,000 moments of pretending. Until one day, the voice inside, the real voice, goes silent. That voice is the authentic self. The raw, emotional, instinctive part of a person that knows what brings them joy, what hurts them, what excites them, what aligns with their truth. But the authentic self doesn't shout. It whispers. And in a world full of noise from expectations, obligations, social media, performance pressure, and survival, it gets drowned out. People don't wake up one day dead inside. It happens gradually. First, they stop doing things they love. Then they stop feeling deeply. Then they stop believing they have a choice. They start living by default, doing what's expected, not what's desired. They go where they should, love who they're told to, act how they're trained to. They're not alive, they're functioning. And here's where psychology offers a brutal truth. When people suppress their authentic selves long enough, they develop what's called depersonalization. It's the experience of feeling disconnected from your body, emotions, or sense of identity. You become a passenger in your own life, watching yourself smile, talk, nod, but feeling none of it. It's not depression. Exactly. It's not anxiety either. It's emptiness, a fog, a lack of presence, like your soul stepped out of your body and never returned. Why does this happen? Because the brain, in order to survive prolonged inner conflict, chooses disconnection over chaos. If who you are constantly clashes with who you're forced to be, your mind shuts off the fight. And with that, your inner aliveness fades. So many people silently suffer from this. They aren't in crisis, but they're not okay. They're not broken, but they're lost. They've spent so long wearing masks of strength, of confidence, of normalcy, that they no longer know where the mask ends and they begin. Some numb themselves with work. Others chase pleasure. Some avoid silence at all costs because in silence, the emptiness becomes unbearable. Some overachieve to outrun their hollowness. Others isolate, convinced no one would understand the person hiding behind the smile. The worst part? This kind of emotional death is often rewarded. You're seen as mature for not reacting, responsible for sacrificing your passions, wise for suppressing desire. But wisdom isn't about killing emotion. It's about understanding it. And sacrifice without self-awareness is not maturity. It's self-abandonment. Over time, this self-abandonment becomes a habit. You stop listening to your body. You don't notice when something drains you. You say yes when you mean no. You stay when you want to leave. You shrink when you want to express. And it all looks so normal, so well-adjusted. But inside, it's silent, cold, lifeless. This is the final cost of emotional suppression. Not just sadness, not just stress, but disconnection from the very core of who you are. And yet, there's something miraculous about the human spirit. It remembers. Even when buried under years of numbness and noise, it remembers. That's why sometimes, out of nowhere, you might hear a song that makes you cry without knowing why, or visit a place and feel a strange sense of belonging, or dream of a version of yourself that feels more real than anything you've lived. That's not your imagination. That's your authentic self knocking, asking to be remembered. Reconnecting with it is not a switch you flip. It's a path you walk. It starts by pausing, by noticing what energizes you and what drains you, by asking yourself, not what's right, but what's real. It requires unlearning everything you've been taught about being enough and beginning to ask, who was I before I was told who to be? It also requires compassion, because once you begin reconnecting with your real self, grief will come. Grief for the years spent performing, for the dreams abandoned, for the love you didn't let in, for the you that went unseen, even by yourself. But that grief is in the end. It's the beginning of your return, because when people come back to themselves, something incredible happens. Color returns to life. Joy stops being a concept and starts being a feeling. Relationships become deeper. Moments feel real. And the fog, that numb, suffocating fog, begins to lift. The truth is, most people aren't afraid of death. They're afraid they'll live their whole life never having truly lived. And they're right to be afraid, because psychological death doesn't happen in one moment. It happens when you stop showing up for yourself, over and over, until one day, there's no one left to show up. But it's never too late. As long as there's breath, there's still the possibility of return, of reconnection, of rebirth. The authentic self waits, patiently, quietly, faithfully. And when you start listening, it will rise. Because being truly alive is not about achievement, status, or survival. It's about presence, emotion, purpose. It's about being fully you. And that version of you, the real one, isn't gone, just hidden, just waiting, just ready. So what does it truly mean to be dead inside? It means living a life that looks fine from the outside, but feels hollow on the inside. It means being disconnected from your emotions, trapped in roles you never chose, conditioned by society, haunted by unhealed pain, and so far removed from your real self that silence feels like danger. But here's the truth that psychology uncovers and healing confirms. You were never meant to live that way. You were never meant to just survive. You were meant to feel, to love, to connect, to wake up each day with a sense of realness, not routine. The world may have taught you to suppress, to perform, to forget who you are, but your soul hasn't forgotten. Your body hasn't forgotten. And it's never too late to remember. Healing begins the moment you stop pretending. It deepens the moment you start listening to what you ignored for years. And it becomes real the moment you decide you're worthy of a life that feels alive. You don't need to fix yourself. You need to come home to yourself. Because being truly alive isn't something the world gives you. It's something you reclaim. And if you're hearing this, maybe it's your time.